3 days ago, my husband Marcus suggested we have another baby. When I asked what his role would be, he said I'd figure it out like I always do. That's when it hit me. I've been married to a man who sees me as his personal life manager, not his partner. Let me explain how I got here because this is completely insane. Marcus and I have been together for 11 years, married for 8. We have an 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, who is honestly the only reason I haven't completely lost my mind. When Marcus and I met in college, I thought his free spirit attitude was romantic. My family was obsessed with planning every detail of life, color-coded calendars everywhere, bills paid on exact dates like clockwork. Marcus felt like freedom from all that suffocating structure. He would suggest spontaneous road trips at midnight to see random bands, or decide at 1 a.m. that we absolutely had to learn how to make homemade pasta right then. It was exciting and felt like real love compared to my rigid upbringing. But somewhere around year 3, I started noticing that we'll figure it out always meant Rachel will figure it out. When Marcus quit his marketing job without giving notice because he didn't like his boss, I was the one stretching our budget for 3 months while he casually looked for something new. When he decided our apartment was too noisy and we needed to move, I handled every single piece of paperwork and logistics while he browsed Craigslist for furniture we couldn't afford. I didn't mind at first because I genuinely loved him and I was pretty good at handling practical stuff. Marcus would always tell me how incredible I was at organizing everything, how he had no idea how I kept track of it all. It felt like we made a perfect team. He was the creative dreamer, I was the practical planner who made things happen. This dynamic got significantly worse when we got engaged after 5 years together. I planned our entire wedding by myself. Marcus showed up to maybe 4 vendor meetings total and spent most of those checking his phone or seeming distracted. When I asked him to be more involved, he would say I had such strong opinions about wedding details and he just wanted me to be happy. Plus, I was so much more organized than he could ever be. I thought that was sweet back then. He trusted me to create our perfect day and didn't want to interfere with my vision. Now I realize I was already drowning in responsibilities while he got to be the laid-back groom who just showed up. After we got married, Marcus started a new job at a tech startup, and things felt more stable temporarily. We moved from our rental apartment to a small starter home with a mortgage, started seriously discussing kids, and I thought we were finally becoming true equal partners in building our life together. Then I got pregnant with Sophie 2 years after our wedding. I had these completely naive expectations that becoming parents would naturally make Marcus step up and take on more adult responsibilities. I pictured him getting excited about researching baby gear and reading parenting books, maybe taking charge of setting up the nursery. Instead, he seemed to assume that since I was the pregnant one, I would naturally handle all the preparation work. I researched every single pediatrician in our area and toured what felt like dozens of daycare centers. I read every pregnancy and parenting book I could get my hands on, took detailed notes on everything we'd need, and created our entire baby registry from scratch. Marcus was definitely excited about having a baby in theory, but when it came to any actual preparation work, he would just say I was going to be such an amazing mom, and he trusted my judgment completely on all the details. When Sophie was born, Marcus absolutely adored her from the first moment. He's never been anything but a loving, devoted father, and watching him hold her for the first time made me fall in love with him all over again. But even from day one, I was the one handling every single night feeding, tracking every pediatrician appointment, managing every daycare application and communication. Marcus figured that since I was on maternity leave, baby-related tasks naturally fell under my daily responsibilities. When I went back to work after 4 months, that division of labor never changed. I was working full-time at my graphic design job and still doing probably 90% of the actual hands-on parenting work. Every time I tried talking to Marcus about sharing responsibilities more equally, he would get this wounded expression and say he helped whenever I asked him to, but I was so much better at remembering all the details and managing complex schedules. If I needed him to do something specific, I should just tell him exactly what it was. The problem was that I was already completely exhausted from working full-time and taking care of Sophie. The absolute last thing I wanted was to have to create detailed task lists for my husband like he was another child I needed to manage. I wanted him to notice what needed to be done and just do it without me having to spell everything out constantly. This became our biggest recurring fight for years. I would feel completely overwhelmed and resentful, then try explaining that I needed him to take more initiative around the house and with Sophie. He would get defensive and say he felt like nothing he ever did was good enough for me, that I was too much of a perfectionist and needed to just let him help in his own way. Marcus developed this catchphrase that he would use whenever I expressed any kind of anxiety or frustration about our life. If you want our life to be more stable and organized, you need to make that happen. I can't make you feel secure about stuff. That's something only you can control. That became his standard response to literally everything. Worried about our finances? My problem to solve. Frustrated that we never seemed to have any kind of routine or structure. My responsibility to create one. Anxious about planning for Sophie's future or our family's long-term goals. Only I could manage those feelings and concerns. When Sophie was 2 years old, Marcus decided he wanted to quit his job and start his own freelance consulting business. He'd been complaining about his manager for months, and I understood why he wanted to change. But his approach was just to quit without any real plan whatsoever. No business strategy, no financial cushion, no timeline for when he might actually start generating income. I completely panicked. We had mortgage payments, daycare costs, health insurance premiums, and all the normal expensive reality of life with a toddler. I begged him to at least wait until he had some clients lined up, or to transition more gradually by going part-time first. But Marcus said I was being way too negative and risk-averse, that I got so focused on worst-case scenarios that I missed amazing opportunities right in front of us. If I needed financial security, I needed to build it myself. So that's exactly what I did. I started taking on freelance design projects on top of my full-time job. I worked evenings and weekends to build up our emergency fund. I researched health insurance options and found coverage we could afford without his employer benefits. I basically became the sole financial safety net for our entire family. Marcus's consulting business was a complete disaster from start to finish. He would get incredibly excited about potential clients, spend weeks creating these elaborate proposals and presentations, then get completely devastated when deals fell through or prospects ghosted him. After 8 months of this roller coaster with almost no income, he finally took a part-time position at his friend's small company, but it paid significantly less than his previous job. Meanwhile, I was working close to 70 hours a week trying to keep us financially stable, and I was still handling most of the childcare responsibilities and household management. I was completely exhausted and increasingly resentful every single day, but every time I brought this up with Marcus, he would remind me that he never asked me to take on all that extra freelance work. I had chosen those projects because I wanted financial security, so that was my decision to deal with. When Sophie was 3, our mortgage payments became difficult to manage on our reduced income. Marcus was excited about this challenge. He saw it as motivation to find creative solutions, maybe renovate and flip our house for profit. All I could see was another financial disaster waiting to happen. I ended up refinancing our mortgage and taking on even more freelance work to keep us afloat. Marcus spent time researching renovation ideas and had lots of opinions about what would add value to our home, but I was the one who actually met with contractors, got quotes, and handled all the paperwork with our lender. Around this time, I started having panic attacks. They would hit at completely random moments, standing in grocery store checkout lines, sitting in work meetings, sometimes even waking me up in the middle of the night with my heart racing, and this overwhelming sense that some kind of disaster was about to happen. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Chun, who helped me understand that my anxiety was primarily coming from feeling like I was carrying our entire family's stability and future completely alone. She suggested having some serious conversations with Marcus about redistributing responsibilities more fairly between us. When I brought this up with Marcus, he was sympathetic but ultimately dismissive. He said he was really sorry I was feeling so stressed out, but he couldn't fix my anxiety issues for me. That was something I needed to work on in therapy and figure out for myself. He wasn't technically wrong. I did need to address my anxiety and develop better coping strategies. But his complete unwillingness to even consider how our household dynamic might be contributing to my stress levels was absolutely infuriating and made me feel even more alone. When Sophie was 4, Marcus decided he wanted to go back to school and get an MBA. He'd been feeling stuck in his part-time position and thought that more education would open up better opportunities and higher-paying positions. It wasn't necessarily a terrible idea, but his approach was so typically Marcus. Spend a few weeks researching different programs, get excited about the possibilities, and start talking about it like it was already a completely decided plan. I asked him when exactly he was planning to do this, how we were going to pay for tuition, what would happen to his current part-time income. Marcus said I was doing that thing again, where I focused on all the potential problems instead of seeing the amazing possibilities. If I wanted our life to stay stable during this major transition, I would need to figure out how to make that work. I spent the next several weeks researching MBA programs, calculating costs, and trying to determine how we could possibly make this financially feasible. I found a program that offered evening and weekend classes so Marcus could keep working part-time. I completely restructured our already tight budget to accommodate tuition costs. I researched student loan options and explored every possibility with our bank. Marcus got accepted and started classes that fall. I was genuinely proud of him for pursuing his goals and trying to improve our family's long-term prospects, but I was also completely exhausted from having planned this entire major life change by myself, while he got to focus on the exciting parts like selecting courses and networking with other students. The 2 years Marcus was in school were probably the absolute hardest period of our entire marriage. He was constantly stressed about coursework and completely absorbed in his studies and group projects. I was working full-time plus freelance projects, handling most of the day-to-day parenting responsibilities, and trying to maintain our financial stability while we paid for his tuition and books. Sophie started asking why Daddy was always too busy to come to her school events or help with bedtime stories. I found myself constantly making excuses for him, telling her that Daddy was working really hard in school to make things better for our whole family in the future. But I was starting to seriously question whether that was actually true. Marcus seemed happier during those 2 years than he had been in ages, but that was only because he got to focus entirely on his own personal goals while I managed literally everything else about our daily lives. When I tried talking to him about feeling completely overwhelmed, he would just say to hang in there for 2 more years, then everything would be totally different. When Marcus finally graduated with his MBA last year, I expected him to naturally step up more at home and take on additional responsibilities. Instead, he threw himself into job searching with the exact same single-minded focus he'd applied to his coursework. He spent entire days networking, attending interviews, and researching companies while I continued handling all household management and most parenting duties. He did end up landing an excellent position, the best job he'd ever had, with a salary that was double what he'd been making part-time, and finally made the MBA investment seem worthwhile. But even with his dramatically improved career situation, our household dynamic remained exactly the same as it had always been. If anything, Marcus seemed to think his professional success proved that his entire approach to life was correct and validated. After his first performance review at the new job, he told me everything had worked out perfectly and I had been worried about nothing all along. But I hadn't been worried about nothing. Everything had worked out because I had held our entire family together while he pursued his dreams. I had sacrificed opportunities for my own career advancement, my sleep, my mental health, and quality time with Sophie to make his goals possible. 6 months ago, when Sophie was 7.5, I reached my absolute breaking point. Marcus started talking excitedly about buying a bigger house now that his income had increased, and his approach was predictably enthusiastic but completely impractical. He wanted to tour properties in expensive neighborhoods, had all these grand visions for renovation projects, and seemed to just assume that I would handle all the research and logistics involved in actually purchasing a home. I told him I absolutely could not do this anymore, that I could not be the only person in our marriage who thought about practical things, that I could not be responsible for every single detail of our lives while he got to focus on dreams and possibilities. Marcus looked genuinely surprised and said he thought we made an amazing team, that we'd always worked so well together. I asked him when he had last scheduled a doctor's appointment for Sophie, when he had last paid bills without me setting up the system, when he had last planned any kind of family activity or outing. Marcus said that wasn't fair because he worked full-time at a demanding job now, and I was so much better at organizing and managing details than he was. I told him I wasn't naturally better at it. I just did it because someone absolutely had to, and he had made it clear it wouldn't be him. We ended up having this incredibly long, difficult conversation that night where Marcus admitted he'd gotten comfortable letting me handle most of the practical aspects of our life, but said he honestly didn't realize how much it was affecting me or how unfair the situation had become. He promised to try being more proactive about taking on responsibilities around the house. For about a month, things actually did improve, significantly. Marcus started doing more stuff around the house, without being asked. He took Sophie to a couple of her activities. He even took over paying some of our monthly bills and seemed to be making a real effort to change our dynamic. But gradually, everything just slipped back into the exact same old patterns. Marcus would start out strong with new responsibilities, then slowly let them slide and slide until I was handling them again. When I pointed this out to him, he would say he was really trying his best, but I had such specific ways of doing things that it was honestly just easier for everyone if I handled it myself. That's when I made the decision that has completely consumed and defined my life for the past 5 months. I decided to take Marcus's advice totally and completely. If I wanted stability, I would create it entirely myself. If I needed organization and planning, I would organize and plan everything down to the smallest detail. If I wanted our family to have routines and structure, I would build those systems entirely alone and completely stop expecting Marcus to participate at all that. I spent an entire weekend while Marcus was visiting his parents and Sophie was at my sister's house creating what I now call the system. I made incredibly detailed spreadsheets for absolutely everything I could think of: our budget, bill due dates, Sophie's school calendar, medical appointments, household maintenance tasks, meal planning, grocery lists, literally every aspect of our lives. I set up automatic payments for every single bill so I wouldn't need to think about them month to month. I created a rotating meal plan for 3 months at a time so I wouldn't have to make decisions about what to cook each night. I scheduled all of Sophie's regular appointments: pediatrician, dentist, eye doctor, even her annual school physical, for the entire year in advance. I researched summer camps and after-school programs and got Sophie registered early before all the good spots filled up. I made comprehensive lists of birthday and holiday gifts to purchase throughout the year, so I wouldn't be scrambling at the last minute trying to figure out what to buy people. I created a detailed household maintenance schedule that tracked when to change air filters, deep clean appliances, organize closets, and handle seasonal tasks. I even made lists of weekend activities to do with Sophie so we'd always have plans and never have to figure out what to do with our free time. The goal was removing every bit of mental load and decision fatigue from my daily life. If everything was planned and systematized in advance, I thought I could finally relax and actually enjoy my family instead of constantly worrying about what needed to be done next. I didn't tell Marcus about most of this massive project. I just quietly started implementing all these systems and processes. When he asked about something, I'd give him whatever information he needed, but I completely stopped asking for his input on planning anything or expecting him to help organize our lives in any way. The results were immediate and absolutely dramatic. Our life became incredibly smooth and organized almost overnight. Bills were always paid exactly on time. We never ran out of groceries or household supplies. Sophie's schedule became totally consistent and predictable, and she seemed so much happier having clear routines. I stopped having panic attacks because I always knew exactly what was coming next. Marcus definitely noticed the change and told me I seemed so much more relaxed lately, that whatever I was doing was really working well for our family. But here's what nobody warned me about: creating perfect stability while living with someone who contributes absolutely nothing to maintaining that stability is incredibly isolating and lonely. Marcus started taking our smooth-running household completely for granted. He stopped even pretending to think about practical things because he knew I had everything handled perfectly. When friends would compliment us on how organized and put together we always seemed, Marcus would beam with pride like he was somehow part of creating that organization. Marcus would tell people I was absolutely amazing at keeping everything under control, that he was so lucky to have married someone who had it all figured out. But he never asked how I managed to keep everything under control. He never offered to learn any of the systems I'd created. He never even seemed curious about the work involved. He just enjoyed living in a perfectly organized household while contributing zero effort to maintaining that organization. The mental load actually got heavier, not lighter. Yes, I had detailed systems for everything, but I was the only person who understood how those systems worked. I was the only one monitoring them, updating them, maintaining them, and making sure they kept functioning properly every single day. When Sophie got strep throat and needed to stay home from school, I rearranged my entire work schedule, coordinated with her teacher about missed assignments, picked up prescriptions, and researched whether we needed any follow-up care. Marcus expressed appropriate concern about Sophie being sick, but it never occurred to him to take time off work himself or help problem-solve any aspect of the situation. When our water heater started making these weird grinding noises, I researched replacement options, got multiple quotes, and scheduled the installation during my lunch breaks over several days. Marcus was mildly interested in hearing about the costs when I told him about it later, but never thought to take ownership of the problem himself or handle any part of getting it fixed. When Sophie's school sent home summer camp registration forms, I researched different programs, compared costs and schedules, and filled out all the applications with essays and emergency contact information. Marcus had plenty of opinions about which camp sounded fun for Sophie, but didn't do any of the actual work required to make camp happen. I realized that my elaborate systems had made Marcus's life incredibly easy and stress-free while making my own life more complex and demanding than ever before. He got to be the fun, spontaneous parent while I was the boring, practical one ensuring everything ran smoothly behind the scenes. What made it so much worse was that Marcus seemed genuinely unaware of this dynamic. In his mind, I was naturally good at organization and he was naturally bad at it, so our division of labor made perfect sense. He couldn't see all the hours of work that went into maintaining our household systems because that work was completely invisible to him. When I tried talking to him about still feeling overwhelmed despite having everything so organized, he would say everything was running so smoothly now, and I should feel really proud of what I'd accomplished for our family. He wasn't wrong. I had accomplished something genuinely impressive. Our life was more organized and efficient than it had ever been before. But I felt like I was managing a small business, while Marcus got to be a carefree customer enjoying all the services without ever thinking about how they were provided or maintained. The loneliness became absolutely devastating. I felt like I was living with a pleasant roommate who happened to share my bed and co-parent my child, rather than with a true life partner. Marcus was physically present, but emotionally and practically absent from the daily work of maintaining our life together. I started having these elaborate fantasies about what it would be like to live alone with Sophie. In my imagination, I'd have the exact same level of organization and planning, but without the constant underlying frustration of carrying the mental load for someone else who didn't appreciate or even notice that worked. At least as a single parent, I'd only be responsible for managing 2 lives instead of 3. I wouldn't have to coordinate around a grown man who seemed perfectly capable of handling complex projects at his demanding job, but somehow couldn't remember to schedule his own dental cleaning. 3 days ago, everything came to a complete head when Marcus started talking about having another baby. We were watching TV after Sophie had gone to bed when Marcus casually mentioned that he'd been thinking we should have another baby. He said Sophie was 8 now and really independent. We were in such a good place with everything running smoothly and our finances finally stable with his new salary, and Sophie would probably love having a little sibling. I asked him if he had any idea how much work it would be to add another baby to our family right now, given everything we already had going on. Marcus said of course he understood it would be work, but look how well I'd gotten everything organized, how I'd created all these amazing systems that worked so perfectly. He was sure I'd handle it just fine. That phrase, "you'd handle it," made something inside me completely snap. Not "we'd handle it together," or "let's figure out how to make this work as a team." Just me handling it, like adding another entire human being to our family, was just another item on my endless to-do list. I asked him what exactly his role would be with the second baby. Marcus looked confused by the question and said he'd be the dad, obviously, same as he was with Sophie. I asked him what being Sophie's dad looked like on a daily basis. Marcus said he spent time with her, played games with her, helped with homework when I asked him to. He said he was a good dad and loved Sophie very much. He wasn't wrong about being a loving father, but his version of fatherhood was all the fun, optional parts of parenting, not the daily grind of keeping a child fed, clothed, healthy, educated, and on schedule. I asked Marcus if he knew when Sophie's next doctor appointment was scheduled. He looked uncomfortable and said I handled all the calendar stuff, so he didn't keep track of specific dates. Asked if he knew what size clothes she wore now, or what her current shoe size was. He said not specifically, that I usually bought her clothes. I asked if he knew her teacher's name, or which friends she'd been having problems with lately, or when her next book report was due, or what her favorite subject was this year. Marcus asked what my point was, that I was obviously more plugged into those kinds of day-to-day details. I told him my point was that he wanted me to take on raising a second child while he continued being minimally involved in the practical aspects of raising the first one. Marcus got defensive and said that wasn't fair, that he worked hard at a demanding job to support our family financially, and he was always there for Sophie when she needed him. I pointed out that I also worked hard to support our family financially, but I also worked hard to support our family practically and emotionally every single day. I asked if he would take paternity leave with a second baby, if he would handle night feedings, if he would research pediatricians and daycare options and interview babysitters. Marcus automatically said I was so much better at research and planning than he was. I told him I wasn't naturally better at it. I just did it because it needed to be done, and there was a huge difference between those two things. We haven't talked about having another baby since that conversation, but it made something crystal clear for me. Marcus genuinely doesn't understand that the stability and organization he appreciates so much is the result of constant, invisible labor on my part. He thinks I'm naturally more organized, that managing our household comes easily to me because I have some kind of innate talent for it. He has absolutely no idea that I spend hours every single week maintaining the systems that make our life run smoothly. He sees the results but is completely blind to the process that creates those results. I'm starting to think the only way Marcus will ever understand what I do is if I stop doing it entirely. But I can't bring myself to let everything fall apart because Sophie would suffer, and she doesn't deserve that. I feel completely trapped between protecting my daughter and enabling my husband's learned helplessness. I don't know what to do anymore. I created the stability I wanted, but I've never felt more unstable in my life. Update: 2 weeks later, I showed Marcus this post. I figured if he couldn't understand our dynamic when I explained it to him directly, maybe seeing it written out and reading all your comments would finally make it click. Marcus was quiet for a long time after reading it. Then he said he had no idea I felt this trapped and alone, and that seeing our relationship described this way was genuinely shocking to him. He asked if I wanted to try marriage counseling. I said yes, mostly because I was curious to see how he would explain our household dynamic to a neutral third party who didn't have years of context and habit patterns to work through. Update, 6 weeks later. Our therapist, Dr. Williams, has been absolutely brilliant at drawing out the reality of our situation. In our third session, she asked Marcus to describe what he thought a typical week looked like in our household. He talked about his work schedule, the weekend activities he enjoyed with Sophie, and mentioned that I handled most of the organizing stuff. When Dr. Williams asked me to describe the same week, I walked through managing Sophie's entire school schedule and extracurricular coordination, our household maintenance systems, all financial planning and bill management, meal planning and grocery shopping, tracking everyone's medical appointments, and maintaining all the detailed systems that kept our life running smoothly. The look on Marcus's face was genuinely startling. Dr. Williams asked him if he'd been aware of everything I'd just described. Marcus admitted he knew I was really organized, but he'd never actually thought through the full scope of what that meant in terms of daily work and mental energy. Dr. Williams then asked Marcus what would happen if I stopped doing all those things tomorrow. He looked genuinely panicked and said everything would probably fall apart within days. She asked him why he thought it was fair or sustainable for one person to carry that entire load indefinitely. Marcus said he'd honestly never thought about it that way before, that he'd always assumed I enjoyed organizing things and was naturally better at it than he was. Dr. Williams asked him if he enjoyed his job. When he said yes, she asked if that meant his coworkers should have to do his work for him since he was good at it and liked it. The silence in that room was deafening. Something finally clicked for Marcus when he heard our dynamic explained by someone who wasn't emotionally invested in our patterns. Update, 3 months later. The change in Marcus has been slow but genuinely dramatic. Dr. Williams gave us homework assignments where Marcus had to take complete ownership of specific household responsibilities, not just helping when I asked, but actually managing entire areas from start to finish. Marcus now handles all of Sophie's school communications and coordination. He gets the emails from teachers, manages her homework schedule, attends parent conferences, and volunteers for school events. He took over our complete meal planning system and does all the grocery shopping. He's also managing our household maintenance schedule and actually researches the best ways to handle problems instead of just asking me to figure out. The most important change is that he does his own research and problem solving now instead of expecting me to be his personal Google assistant. Last month, when our washing machine started leaking, Marcus spent his own time researching repair versus replacement options, got multiple quotes, and handled the entire situation without involving me except to discuss the final decision together. The change in our relationship has been incredible. For the first time in years, I'm not constantly resentful or keeping a mental tally of everything Marcus isn't doing. I actually enjoy spending time with him again because I'm not mentally exhausted from managing his life along with my own and Sophie's. Sophie has definitely noticed the difference too. She loves that both parents are equally involved in her daily life now. She told me last week that she likes how Daddy knows about her school stuff now and can help her with things without having to ask me first. Marcus seems genuinely happier as well. He told me he feels much more connected to our actual family life instead of just floating through it while I handled all the details behind the scenes. Update, 6 months later. We're buying our bigger house, and Marcus is handling the entire process. He found our real estate agent, researched different neighborhoods based on school districts and our budget, coordinated all the home inspections, and is managing every piece of paperwork with our lender and lawyers. I give input on decisions, and we discuss everything together, but he's doing all the actual work involved in making it happen. Last week, Marcus told me he had no idea how much invisible work I'd been doing for all these years, or how completely unfair our arrangement had become. He said he feels like a real partner in our marriage now instead of just someone who lived in our house and benefited from my labor without contributing equally. Update, 8 months later. We're pregnant. But this time, everything is completely different. Marcus brought up trying for another baby 2 months ago, and when we started discussing it, he immediately began talking about taking extended paternity leave, handling night feedings, and researching pediatric care options. He's already started reading parenting books and asked me to show him my systems for tracking Sophie's early development so he can be equally involved this time. When I automatically started taking over the pregnancy planning out of old habits, Marcus gently reminded me that this was his responsibility too, and he wanted to handle the research on car seats, cribs, and childproofing supplies. The most shocking part of all this is that our marriage is genuinely better than it's ever been, even better than those early spontaneous years that felt so romantic. We're actually functioning as true equal partners now instead of me being his life manager while he got to be the fun, creative one. I'm not saying our relationship is perfect or that we never disagree about things, but we're finally operating from a place of real equality and mutual respect. Marcus has proven he's completely capable of being a fully functioning adult partner. He just needed to be confronted with the reality of our situation and genuinely commit to changing his patterns. The scariest part of this whole experience is realizing how many women I know who are living exactly like I was, managing entire households and families while their partners contribute minimally and act like that's just the natural order of things. It's not natural at all. It's learned helplessness, and it's completely fixable if both people are willing to do the work to change it. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never reached my breaking point and forced this conversation. I'd probably still be drowning in resentment while Marcus remained blissfully unaware of how much invisible labor it actually takes to maintain a family. But I'm incredibly grateful we found our way through it because now I finally have the true partnership I always thought we had but never actually experienced. If you're reading this and recognizing your own relationship, please know that it doesn't have to stay this way. But it probably won't change unless you stop enabling the dynamic and force an honest conversation about what equality actually looks like in practice, not just in theory.